back to beating a dead horse. Once again, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And it's me, your best friend, Jackson. I feel like we've been here before. Have we been here before?
I think we've been here before because this is the fourth time we've tried to take on Undertale. Technically, listen, we'll be generous and say it's really only our third time. We just had a really bad intro a second ago, so this is kind of the fourth. But yes, no, we're doing Undertale. This will be the second time that you all hear us talk about Undertale, but this is actually the third time we're doing it because we recorded last night and kind of ended and went, We're doing this to make up for the last one. Specifically, Sean is, because Sean was unhappy with the way the last Undertale went. And yes, I am talking in the third person right now. Don't question it. And so I'm like, let's do this again. We'll take it again. And we did. And then we ended it. And I'm like, I felt really stupid and bad at the end of that one. Can we do it again? And Jackson is an absolutely wonderful, great person. And is like, Sean, I respect what you're saying. Yes, let's do Undertale for the third goddamn time, because we want to deliver you a good product so you enjoy listening to it.
Yeah, no, because I wasn't super happy with how the recording turned out either. I definitely went into like a rambly mode, and like my goal going in was to not say the same shit that I said the first time. And like after I thought about it, I'm like, I'm pretty sure I said the same shit I said the first time. So, you know, that's not a great thing. So I wasn't especially happy with it either, which is why I was more than it was more than reasonable to say, especially for going with the express purpose of doing a better thing to do a re-recording on this.
Yeah, the first Undertale was like episode 6 for us, and I would like to present an episode that was probably closer. Let's shoot for like episode 75 in quality. All right, like I'm not. We don't even have to hit like, because the Snowpiercer episode we just did was a fucking banger. We've had a couple fucking Uncut Gems, absolute banger of an episode. Let's not even stress out and try and hit that. Let's just try and hit something listenable as opposed to fucking episode 6. All right.
Yeah. And I guess, like, you know, I was mentioning this in the pre-discussion. I think it's worth saying here that I think in general, Undertale, for a lot of reasons, is a difficult game to talk about, and it was extremely ambitious of us to even try talking about it in the first place as of like episode 6.
That was such a crazy fucking idea. And well, I think part of it though too was that I know at least I was stupid enough to truly believe that I could talk about it back then. And I am now looking back at it and I'm like, I don't know that I am competent enough to talk about it now. And oh my God, I was definitely not competent enough to talk about it back then. So we're here to try and right some wrongs of diving into Undertale way too soon in our podcast's legacy, and hopefully bring it up to a place that we're happy with.
We're hoping this will be the true pacifist run of the Undertale episodes after several failed attempts. You know, we accidentally killed Vegetoid, you know, here and there.
So if you are somehow joining us and you don't know what the fuck Undertale is, first of all, how have you just missed all the past 5-6 years that it's been out? Where have you been? Second of all, Undertale is a rather unique JRPG where you actually don't have to fight and kill monsters. You can talk to them and befriend them and help their problems instead for the combat. It's a really interesting, ambitious JRPG that does a lot of really, really cool stuff. And I don't even really necessarily want to say too much about it in describing it, other than it's a JRPG and I really like it, which means that even if you're not a fan of JRPGs, you should try it. It's going to surprise you, I can tell you that. And also, there's a lot of spoilers in there, and I don't want to just give away the ghost right now.
Yeah.
Should I say the knobs to Blook?
I love Nobstabluk.
I do too. He's so great. Everyone in this game is great.
I agree. I think that if you have somehow not played Undertale and you care to, I'd say definitely leave now.
Even if you don't care to, go play Undertale. Like,
Yeah,
it is a 6-hour game, and it is worth your time to at least experience.
I mean, fuck. For perspective, I can't believe I forgot to mention this in our initial like do-over. I actually made my students play this game or like watch a Let's Play in class and discussed it as like a piece of literature back when I was still teaching.
So high praise right there. This has been taught in a college class about English, like literature stuff.
Yes, and so like without going too much into my like specific opinions about it, like that should be enough to tell you that this game is something special and it is absolutely worth your time if you are, again, somehow don't already know that.
And it also should be worth mentioning that while I have never taught college, I agree with Jackson's decision to teach it in college, which should say enough about the fact that we're going to criticize this game in a lot of ways. But that's not to say it's necessarily a bad game. Even when we get into some of our darker criticisms of it, as Jackson will in a bit here, don't take that as us slagging it off as much as it is just wanting it to be a little bit better in some ways and feeling disappointed when it doesn't live up to the lofty expectations it sets elsewhere and lands elsewhere. Like, it is such a really, really good, great game that when it doesn't hit those high points all the way through, it feels harsh.
It's a very complex, ambitious game in every sense. It's complex and ambitious in the narrative. It's complex and ambitious in the mechanics. So I think it's understandable that something as bold and brash as this game, like, doesn't quite execute everything perfectly. Even when it doesn't, it's still really, really cool and interesting.
Yeah, I think that to even fail interestingly is a great thing.
Yes.
Like, the worst thing to do is to fail boringly or shittily, and we've talked at great fucking length about this. Listen to our most recent Patreon episode if you haven't, for just an in-depth discussion on that, or any number of dozens of episodes we've talked about that on. But no, this game, even when it's doing something poorly, it's doing something poorly interestingly. For the most part. I think we'll talk about the combat here in a minute, which is where that kind of falls on its face a little bit, but not in a way of it's doing it poorly and badly, more that it's doing it poorly and just okayly. Before we get to that, though, we should just really quick run down our experiences with Undertale, because this is the third time for both of us playing it in some capacity.
Yes, absolutely. Do you want me to go first? Should you go first?
Yeah, kick us off here.
So I guess a brief recap. I first played Undertale when it came out. Before it was cool.
Ooh,
it was like right as it was starting to gain a lot of steam.
Because it's on Steam.
But I played it on Nintendo Switch this time. Oh no, the joke doesn't work anymore. So anyway, it was starting to gain a lot of steam and gain a lot of popularity. It wasn't quite like the juggernaut. I mean, like, Undertale characters are in Smash Bros. In some capacity. Like, it is.
That is still the wildest fucking thing in the goddamn world.
So it wasn't quite at even like, low like meme levels yet, but it was starting to get buzz, and that kind of encouraged me to actually like sit down and play it, because a friend of mine who is an indie dev was like really plugged into the indie scene, is like, hey, I think you would really like this. I backed this game on Kickstarter forever ago, and I played it at the time and enjoyed it for the most part until I got to the very end. And without saying too much, the apparent ending of the game, if you're just playing it straight through, can be pretty underwhelming, perhaps by design. But I really, really disliked the final boss, and I really, really disliked the note the game ended on. It left kind of a sour taste in my mouth. I'm like, oh, that was disappointing. Like, mostly a fun game. But, kind of fell apart there at the end. And then I left and forgot about it, and kind of didn't really get what all the hype was about until we did our first episode about it, where I actually went and, I mean, I guess we'll go into mild spoilers. I think if you're aware of Undertale at any point, you are aware that it has multiple routes and choices. So last time I was dedicated to doing every single route, getting the true ending, seeing the bad ending, which I did. I did see the bad ending. I didn't complete it, not because I like chickened out or whatever. I didn't complete it because I was stupid and like didn't trigger it properly and didn't have enough time to do it correctly. But I did it correctly this time. I played through the two main, like, big important endings. But that is to say that my opinion of the game substantially improved after I played the main routes. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. and then I taught it in my class, which I didn't play it again for just because I was a stressed grad student at the time. And like I had, just played it for the show. So that was like pretty recently. But, obviously it made enough of an impact on me to say like this would be interesting to try and get some college freshman noodles racking their brains about it. So, yeah.
I, on the other hand, have not played it as much as Jackson. I have played it the exact same number of times, but not as thoroughly. The first time I played it, I basically had the exact same experience as Jackson, which I played it through the neutral route, hit the end, went, oh, that was kind of a neat game, and then put it down and only listened to the soundtrack for the past 6 years, because the soundtrack, to just sing the praises of that beyond everything else, is one of the best soundtracks ever released for video games. It is so fucking good, and is worth the price of admission just for that, despite the fact that there is also a very, very good game underneath it.
Top 10, maybe top 5 soundtrack for sure, like unironically, unabashedly.
Absolutely stellar. But my first playthrough very much went the same way as Jackson, that I hit the end and went, oh, this feels familiar, and kind of wrote it off. When we went to do it for the podcast last time, I started to play it and kind of bounced off it just because I was just starting a real job and was kind of like overwrought and overstressed. And so I just kind of bounced off and I'm like, I'm going to go read a bunch of stuff and watch some playthrough of it, and we'll base it off of that. That's not the way to play Undertale. You need to actually play Undertale to get what Undertale is about. And I think that really helped sour my opinion of it for the last one, especially because I came at it hot with just like, this game is just a send-up of this old thing and it doesn't do it interestingly, because my underdeveloped brain did not yet understand how to take and change from other art forms. Which is mostly what I'm here to apologize for, and I will do so pretty soon after the spoiler tag, but we'll get to that. And then this time, I sat down, I played through the neutral run, and I did it correctly so that I could really quickly bounce back in and play the true pacifist run, which is arguably... We'll talk about it, but arguably the ending of the game, if you are going to sit down and play the game for the first time. There's an argument that Jackson will get to that the genocide run is actually the meat of the game, and I don't disagree with him, but for most people, the true pacifist run is the run that you're gonna see.
It should be noted that I'm gonna come out with that take and I'll defend that take. But it should be noted that this is far from like a resolved dispute, like in criticism in like the fandom more broadly speaking, like whether or not you should do the genocide run, whether or not like you've really fully experienced the game until you've done it. Like that's a pretty hot debate even today, like 5 years later. So I just want to acknowledge that right here.
Yeah. That's a good point. I still have not played the genocide run. I don't know that I really have ever any intention to. It does not interest me that much, especially because I have watched other videos for it. Cough, cough, H Bomber Guy's video that you should definitely go check out. It's a very good video. Yeah, it's a good game. That's what I was getting at with my review of all of that, honestly. It's a great game.
Yeah, and I guess like if we're coming to my opinion now, because, my opinion of it improved significantly last time, but I didn't mention like how I felt about it this time, which is to say mostly the same. And I was sort of expecting that going in, because that was I was a little surprised it turned out to be this way. For the last time we did a redo, when we redid Last Jedi, I was sort of expecting some meaningful difference between the take I gave on the show and how I felt about it coming back to it, however many years later, if only because that movie is like so piping hot and spicy and divisive.
And good. Whoa. I'm sorry. I don't know what that was.
So any like reassessment, because I did have a big change in opinion on Last Jedi, or like a big-ish change at least. But that was between, like, I saw Last Jedi. That's one of the only movies I watched twice before recording the episode. So like mostly by the time that we had watched it again for the show, my opinion had pretty much crystallized. And I didn't feel that strongly because then I'm like, oh yeah, like, this is the thing that I already felt. With Undertale, something similar happened in that, like, my opinion of the game has not changed. I think it has strengthened, though, and in both ways. Like, my feelings about it are more polarized, even though, like, if you get to, like, the underlying things I have to praise about it and the things I have to criticize about it, like, those are the same from last time, but for one reason or another, I just feel even more strongly about it. And so I feel even more strongly to start off with the praise. I feel even more strongly that Undertale has some of the best goddamn character writing in the entire industry. Like, from AAA to indie, old and new, like, it is these are fucking amazing characters. There's a lot of subtlety in the dialogue and the drama, and that's all fucking incredible. And like, I keep picking up on like new resonant stuff like every time I play it with the character interactions. But I also feel like that the game, when you look at it as a whole, including the genocide route, is a bit thematically incoherent, despite being really cool. And that's sort of the crux of the game. Like, a lot of the moment to moment is super great. And even within the moment to moment, there are parts like the stuff that, like, I found, like, maybe some of the jokes that didn't work for me that I kind of rolled my eyes at. Time has not been kind to those moments. So like even like like a moment to moment, it's like a wildly uneven experience. Like, honestly, I think this is a more competent, like, better game than the example I'm about to give. But I honestly feel like my experience of this is similar to like Metal Gear Solid 4, which is like the stuff that I love about it. I really love.
Fuck.
I mean, last week we promised Metal Gear references because we were talking about metafiction, and I don't think I made any in the second recording.
Yeah, no, hang on, scrap this episode. We're releasing the one that we don't like. We're done. Fuck this.
But that game similarly has a lot of stuff that's brilliant and a lot of stuff that's really stupid. And granted, the stuff in Metal Gear Solid 4 that's stupid is way stupider than anything in Undertale. That game is like a hot garbage fire. But it's a beautiful garbage fire. I wouldn't say that Undertale is a garbage fire in any way. But I do have strong feelings about it, both for good and ill.
It sometimes sticks its foot in a garbage fire. Isn't a bad way to put it.
Yeah. It can be an acquired taste at times.
Yeah. Which, speaking of acquired taste, can I talk about the combat for a minute here? Because this is the thing that kind of drove me nuts in a weird way this time.
Go for it.
Because the combat is, much like everything else in Undertale, simultaneously absolutely brilliant and infuriating. There is some genuine genius behind how it functions, in that if you are playing a genocide run, which I won't really dive into what that entails, the combat is really boring. It's really uninteresting and encourages you not to do that, which is smart and clever and neat. If you're doing a pacifist run, the combat changes and the boring kind of sticks around in some capacity, but there's a new puzzle element to it that counteracts the boring of the genocide run. The part that stays the same is after you do your genocide or pacifist technique, you have to do bullet hell. And it's not interesting bullet hell for starters, but it's also really uninterestingly repetitious because this is a JRPG, and so you do encounter the same enemies multiple times. So on the first time you encounter them, they come at you with like this interesting bullet hell thing. You're like, yeah, I can dodge this and it's gonna be great. And then you encounter them again and you're like, okay, I know what I'm doing. This is less interesting. And then you start encountering different enemies. And you're like, wait, it's more bullet hell. Why do I care? I know what I'm doing here. It just don't get hit. And it's not particularly interesting bullet hell at that. I compared it to Disc Room, a game that came out very recently that is literally a bullet hell where you're in just a room and discs bounce around. Functionally what Undertale is, to be clear. But Disc Room takes it in such a weird, wacky way every room to change the challenge, to make it different, to encourage you to live long enough and see different things, that it becomes a vastly interesting game. Whereas this, you just, by the end of it, you're like, yeah, I know. I just have to dodge the white things, hit the other color ones, don't hit the other colored ones, and if I turn this color, something else happens. And I know that was vague. I'm trying not to spoil things, but it's just frustrating, especially when Jackson has to do it multiple times, which, again, we will get to.
Right.
But it just, especially once you figure out the puzzle of the pacifist run, it becomes about as boring as the genocide run, because you just know what you have to do. You do it, you dodge, you do it again to get somebody else gone, you dodge again, you end the fight, repeat ad infinitum. How exciting. But again, on your first playthrough, I do think that there is something to it where it is kind of exciting to see what happens in each combat encounter. I just think that as you play it more and more, it wears thin, which is a weird criticism, I would say, because your gut reaction to that would be, well, yeah, no shit, Sherlock. But video games, they're meant to be replayed in a lot of ways. Maybe not Undertale.
I think this one is for sure.
Well, kind of, in some capacities.
Yeah, I think because I don't think the game expects you to get all the requirements for a true pacifist run on the first go. I think the game expects it to be played at least twice.
Yeah, that is fair. But when we get to like 3 or 4 times, I think is where you start to kind of run into that issue.
Right.
But again, though, the point I'm making it here is I have played Super Mario Odyssey like 4 times to almost completion, a game that you 100% should not complete. It's a bad game to complete.
As someone who almost Super Mario Odyssey being so fucking terrible to 100% is like the strongest counter argument about everything I'm gonna say about the genocide run, I think.
Yeah, it fucking sucks. But I've done it at least twice, and I will replay that game again, like once every year, every other year, and have just as much fun with it. Undertale does not have that replayability in the combat, so just a little knock there.
Yeah, I guess what disappoints me about the combat, because I pretty much agree with everything you've said, and to add on to that, like Undertale's in a weird spot in that it's a turn-based game, except it's not really. So, because it is basically like, if you're playing it properly, it is basically a bullet hell. And like the game indicates this to you very early on. Like, I don't think anyone's first impulse is to treat it like a normal RPG. Like, it really sets that groundwork for you with the tutorial section pretty explicitly. Like, that's not necessarily a problem, but I think that because it has like, bullet hell combat, but a JRPG structure, I think it still manages to fall into some of the traps that JRPGs do. And I think the big one, like a big tension, I don't know if this is like necessarily an inherent problem, but it's something that if you're going to design an RPG, you need to think about, because ideally, as someone who likes JRPGs quite a bit, I'd say they're like one of my favorite genres, with a good turn-based game, ideally, like, you're really invested in like the strategy. Like, you're thinking about a lot of like moves. There's a like big tension. Like the boss battles tend to be like the game. Like, putting that like strategy and stuff to the test.
Oh yeah, so, the boss battles. The boss battles, huh? What I've been talking about has not been the boss battles on the whole. It's been random encounters. The boss battles are a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, because it's so weird, because like, despite moment to moment being very different from your normal JRPG, in that sense, it still has it still has that same issue, just in kind of a roundabout way and kind of a different way. Because in a normal JRPG, there's like the grinding. That's sort of the question. Like, well, you want to make it satisfying to like power up, right, and like gain new abilities and stuff. But like, how do you have like some semblance of strategy that keeps like random encounters from being like a complete chore? And that's something that like every game has to deal with. And what I find so strange about Undertale is that like, I think that in terms of the narrative, the random encounters are actually more inspired than the boss battles, even though the boss battles are on the whole like more involved, like in-depth, like bullet hell sections, and are maybe better in that sense. But it's so strange because like obviously the boss battles are like the most fleshed out, interesting characters, and yet when it comes to solving their puzzles, they're the ones that involve the least character work.
The answer is always the same, with like one exception, and that answer is just survive. And eventually the solution will happen to you, which sucks.
Yeah, it's so bizarre that like
here, really a perfect example for this, all right? There's an enemy that is let's say I'm trying to think of a good one. The only one I can think of is Washua, and I don't want to spoil how to beat Washua because that's a unique and perfect. There's a dude that's just like a flexing goat, and the answer to beating the flexing goat is to just flex at him back and forth for like 3 turns until he flexes himself out of the room. And it's great. It's a funny bit the first time you see it. You laugh and you move on. And there's actually a solution to that in which you have to interact with the character as a character. But then to fight later on, almost all of them boil down to, we have removed your ability to talk in this situation. All you can do is survive until the boss has talked themselves out of fighting you. And that sucks. There's not a solution. It's just survive. And some of the bullet hells are okay. Like they invert it on its head, so you have something new to focus on, and it makes it kind of interesting. Others, it's just more bullet hells that you've already been dealing with, so you just keep dodging.
That's sort of what I've been thinking about, is that like I actually like this less than your average JRPG combat. I think part of that is just like I don't really care for bullet hells, generally speaking. But like I think it doesn't have to be this way. But like the combat at its worst is like, yeah, just kind of rote memorization. Like, you know, because the bosses use the attacks in the same order too. So yeah, like you just dodge and then you fuck it up and like trial and error, like dodge another way, and that's less satisfying than, weirdly enough, the random encounters.
To be fair, though, the random encounters are also kind of rote memorization. I think that's kind of what makes the bullet hell less interesting, in that there is some randomness to their attacks, but it's not random in the way that other bullet hells work, in that you kind of formulate a strategy of like, I know how this is going to work, I need to adjust to this. It's mostly just like, okay, there's just going to be a bunch of dots raining down at me. Just move left and right in the corner. Uninteresting. Like, you can't do anything while you're doing this bullet hell. Most of them, there's a goal to accomplish as you're doing it. And here, it's just survive. And the problem is that bullet hells don't thrive when the answer is just survive.
Nice rhyme. Nice me.
Unintentional, but I stand by it. As someone who has played a lot of bullet hells or games that are inspired thereby, the ones that are fun are the ones where you have to do something and not just watch the dots go by on your screen.
Yeah, it's so bizarre, because like you would think that, you know, that Undertale would really like seize on its biggest strength, which is its characters. And like, you know, a lot of those puzzles are funny bits, but it also,
and
like,
good ways to characterize the enemies. Like I think there is something to the characterization there, but there's so many of them.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, especially after like flexing at Aaron. I think his name is just Aaron the horse.
That sounds right.
Flexing at Aaron and having a little flex contest the first time is funny. Doing it the 5th time is not so funny.
Yeah, I get it. I get the characterization. And to the game's credit, I do think that the random encounters are only kind of half random, in that they do exist on the overworld. Like there's a tile set that you step on and it triggers the random encounter. And the game does try to amp up the difficulty in a very video game way, in that you encounter an enemy, then you encounter a different enemy, and then you encounter two of one enemy, and then you encounter two of a different enemy, and then you encounter a mix of them. And so like it does a very good job of ramping up from like understanding how the fight works. But it's just not interesting to deal with is the problem.
Would this be asking too much of Toby Fox, a man who is already like went insane with the amount of detail that he put into this game? Would it have been
probably already without even mentioning it? Probably.
Would it have been better? I think it would have been better. I'm just gonna say I think it would have been better if like the encounters were even more planned out. Like every enemy in the game was unique and it really leaned into that puzzle aspect. Because then that also makes like the moral weight of whether you treat it like a normal JRPG. I think that makes it stronger too, as opposed to like I've killed Aaron for the third time.
Alternatively, what happens here is that you don't even necessarily need to make every enemy encounter in the game unique. You can encounter Aaron 3 times in a row, but depending on what enemy he is with, the interactions change because they're trying to do something different. And there's a couple enemies that are like this, that like you have to get them isolated or with friends or something like that. And that's a really interesting mechanic, but I don't think it goes far enough because you will just fight Aaron with another dude and you just do the same thing anyway. So like an interaction of like you're with Aaron and a siren is there and the answer is to get them to hook up or something like that. That's an interesting gameplay mechanic that continues to flesh out these characters that you keep running into, as opposed to just you do it again, but this time there's a turtle there.
No, I totally agree. I think that'd be a great way to go about it too. And I think that it like with the mechanics, with the combat, I see what he's going for as far as the strategy of like when you get multiple guys who are all like have different attack animations and different patterns, like maybe you prioritize like, you know, getting rid of one before the other, like to you know, make the particular combination of attacks a little easier to deal with. But like the attacks themselves aren't that interesting to deal with, and like that doesn't really come up that much either.
It's almost way. Interesting.
Yeah, like I see what he's like. There's almost something there. I see what you could be going for. But I like our ideas better.
Yeah, I noticed that this time too. I'm like, oh, okay, if I strategize and get rid of this guy first, it'll make the combat session easier, and I can kind of work around that way. And yeah, it wasn't interesting. I was just kind of like, once I figured it was just another puzzle to solve, and once I solved it, encountering that group of enemies again, I'm just like, okay, I know exactly how to do this in a way that will damage me the least. And so the puzzle had been solved. And I mean, that's why board games stop being fun, is because once you solve the puzzle, they're not fun to do. And Undertale is very much a game that can be solved. And that's, you want games that aren't solved per se as much as can be re-experienced and find different ways to solve them.
Yeah, like ideally a really rich game will give you a lot of options on how to approach a thing, which I mean, I guess to be fair, this game does in the strictest sense of that. I don't know if it's like necessarily a horrible thing that like, you know, maybe you have a puzzle game like, you know, that sometimes that's kind of the deal that you go for. Like something, I mean, this is a bad example because you can have a lot of fun playing around with the Portal gun, but something like Portal I wouldn't necessarily criticize because you've solved it, right? But ideally, I think that what's kind of happening here is that Undertale at its core is kind of a puzzle game with like a JRPG structure, and I don't know how well those things mix.
I mean, isn't that Puzzles and Dragons thing literally that?
Isn't that like, well, because I mean a puzzle game like Portal or Zelda, like something where the puzzles are more like thought experiments.
I recognize what you're saying. I was just being an asshole is what it boils down to.
That's fair. Because Puzzles and Dragons is like Tetris or like a Tetris Attack or something, right? Like it's literally like a capital P puzzle game. Like
yes, it is just a puzzle, and I was just being an asshole. Which we're kind of just being assholes here though too. Like I think that some of this is valid criticism, but we are really just coming at a game made by a single dude or a very small team at parts who put together something really interesting and great. But I think the criticism is valid nonetheless. It's still a good game. We should talk about spoilers because we've already been going for like 35 minutes. We should do this.
Let's do spoilers. Let's do it.
But before we do, as always, if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us if you're on iTunes. Tell a friend about us. It's the only way we grow. Support us on Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. Follow us on Twitter, BADH_cast. And next week, we're going to be talking about the original Godzilla, the very, very, very first one from like the 1950s. I'm not going to give an exact date because I will be wrong. But it's the first Godzilla movie. We're very excited to watch some men in rubber suits destroy a fake town.
Yeah, this is like the one thing when we were still doing quarantine classics, like this is the one movie that I really wanted to do that we didn't get to. So, we're I'm feeling that's kind of the theme of this month is tying up some loose ends here and there.
Yeah. So let's finish tying up this Undertale. And Jackson, we experimented one way last night. We're going to experiment the other way this night. Spoilers now. Jackson, tell us a little bit about the genocide run.
All right. So I've done something uncharacteristic for the Horsecast because I'm in word jail for just spewing a bunch of endless nonsense yesterday.
Which, to be clear, don't let Jackson talk down. It was interesting, endless nonsense. But it was endless nonsense. He was raising some interesting points. It just was endless nonsense.
And again, I think part of that is just because Undertale trying to make a strong statement about this stuff is fraught because it is a complicated game, and Toby Fox has famously like refused to comment on Toby Fox is a big fan of Death of the Author, it seems, from what I can gather. So with that said, I've prepared a small paragraph. I'm going to read it exactly because I think that with all the stuff that we want to talk about, I don't want to spend too much time asking if the genocide run can bloom on a battlefield again. Like seriously, it was like Hideo Kojima dialogue yesterday, folks. But I also think that having my perspective on this is going to inform a lot of what we're going to talk about regardless. So I have something. It's short, it's succinct, it lacks detail. Feel free to @ me on Twitter or Discord if you want to argue about whether or not what you think I'm saying is valid. But, in the interest of not bloviating, I will now read this.
Watch H Bomber Guy's video. I already mentioned it. Watch his video on Undertale. This is Jackson's refutation to that, essentially.
Yes, because H. Barber's video, I actually also want to shout it out because it's a very good video, even though I very much disagree. And I mentioned earlier that Undertale is thematically incoherent. I think in some ways that's true. I think that's too strong of a phrase. I think in a lot of ways I take some ideological issue with it. But I do agree with a... What an unprecedented turn of events, truly. Who could have predicted this? That is all to say that it is a very good video. Watching that video sort of helped me come to terms with what it helped me put my finger on what it was about this game that I didn't care for in more concrete details. So yes, even if I disagree, it was still a very interesting, detailed take, and it's been a while since I watched it, so maybe maybe there are some points he brings up that I will be unable to refute because I'm a dingus. So all right, so all that prelude over, here is my statement. The genocide run in the game's metafictional elements are interesting and undeniably very, very fucking cool. The base problem I have with the game's metafictional themes are that it asserts that having the kind of obsession that would lead you to doing the genocide run, to be so obsessed with a game, with a book, with a work of art, is a bad thing. but I don't think the game adequately demonstrates why that is. Furthermore, the game seems to flip-flop between criticizing the player for being too obsessed and criticizing them for treating art as disposable, which I think is a somewhat contradictory position. And to elaborate, like to use the two quotes that I pulled from the game, because I played it on the Switch, I actually screen capped these so I could refer to them later. At the end of the True Pacifist run, Alphys says something like, "Oh, isn't fan fiction, the great? Isn't real life the greatest fan fiction of them all?" That was the quote, and that's obviously really telling in terms of like, oh, you got to move on, and that like, oh, don't be so obsessed with art that you ignore your like real life and your real responsibilities. And also, I screen capped the very end of the Genocide run, which involves Kara, the default name for the fallen child that you name, who's like Azrael's best friend and instigator for the plot, and is basically your gamer spirit in terms of like the allegory, because he says a bunch of shit like, oh, let's kill and loot and get EXP and gold and all this shit, and the thing that I screen capped was
he is the gamer blood that roils within.
He is your proud gamer bloodline. So, the quote that I screen capped was, "Let us destroy this pointless world and move on to the next." So there is at least like, I can back it up. I can back it up with receipts. There are points where the game's telling you, stop being so obsessed, nerd. And also, you should not be so flippant about this, nerd. So, again, I guess like to go any further would be to ramble on about like my ideological disagreements, which is that basically, to sum it up, that I think in weird ways as a society, we both over and underestimate the impact a work of art can have on a person. An individual work, a medium, can obviously have very broad reaching impacts. That's basically it. I think that stuff like speedrunning and fandom and like remix culture and stuff, I think that's all pretty cool. And obviously Toby Fox thinks that's pretty cool because he got his start. Like, not only is his game a big like Earthbound homage, he got his start doing Earthbound ROM hacks. Megalovania first appeared in an Earthbound ROM hack. So clearly he's got his own complicated feelings about these subjects. But like, if I'm going to leave it at that for my bit about the Genocide run, if you want to at me about like any of the details, feel free to. I will happily have that discussion debate with you, but I don't want to bang on about it for too much longer.
To be fair, I do think that, just to Jackson's point, I think that the game, even when I've read, does have that argument with itself, even based around like nostalgia and letting go of the things that you love and understanding culture and fandom is very unsure of itself, and I feel like that kind of reflects even on Toby, even as he tries to death of the author himself out of the picture, his own attempts to deal with his identity as a content creator and like where he needs to work in his own stuff. Like, I think that's interesting. You mentioned Toby's remix culture and like how he got really dragged down into Earthbound remix culture, and is this him being like, it was good, but I need to move on and experience other things. I did that, but I need to let that nostalgia go and create my own world at this point, which is an interesting question it raises, but it does both condemn and welcome that same culture, which I think is indicative of the conflict deep within the author itself.
Yeah, and like that's not a question that there's like an easy answer to, right? Like, in what ways can media be good or bad for us? Like, there's not a lot that you can like say 100% objectively about that. Like, there are like sociological studies, and like we can know that like this thing, like, maybe this particular game, it's been shown like increases aggression in this person by like this amount or whatever, or this like terrorist referenced this book like before like he committed a horrible act. But like, even in that example like that, because I think wasn't it the guy who killed John Lennon, didn't he say he did it because of Catcher in the Rye? Am I making that up?
I don't remember if it was that one. I know like I'm reading a book about Doom right now, and it references the fact that Doom was on the computers of the Columbine shooters. So same deal there. Like, yeah.
Yeah. but even in those examples where, like, you know, they are directly invoked, like at the end of the day, like, was it really Catcher in the Rye that made that guy shoot John Lennon, or was it the like totality of like systemic cultural even you know, genetic, like everything that makes a person? Like, can you really like say that, you know, it was this book made him do it? And so I guess that's kind of what I mean about, like, you know, we both over and underestimate the impact a work of art can have. I think that is an interesting point about, like, maybe him sorting through whether he feels maybe like a complex about like his own roots in like remix culture and like fan fiction and stuff, and like feeling like he personally has to move on. I think that's a very interesting take, honestly. I hadn't thought about that.
I accidentally brought something interesting to the table of the route I haven't played. Oopsie doopsie. So let's jump off from remix culture and dive into, first and foremost, my apology for what I said last time. In that I apologize that I called Undertale a ripoff of Earthbound. That was unfair. And I don't know that I used those exact words, but I feel like the general thesis was me looking down on it because it had a similar way that you approach combat, in that you walk up and you don't see yourself and you just see the enemy in front of you. And then there's the Flowey fight, which I'm going to put an asterisk on that Flowey fight because I still want to say that Flowey fight is a ripoff, but we'll talk about that in a second.
Because I know I fucking hate that Flowey fight, so I'm glad we're going to talk about it.
I also hate that Flowey fight, but I want to kick that can down the road for a second.
Sure.
Yeah, no, it really does boil down to, though, is at the time I didn't really appreciate what effort Toby Fox took to take a clear love for Earthbound and turn it into a totally new idea. Looking at it now, I realize that I described it as a prism in our last episode. I want to stand by that, but I want to explain it a little bit better. And that Undertale is this weird piece of gaming history, in that just so many ideas and games kind of all coalesced into this one title before those same ideas were spread back out into the world. Like a lot of things that people had forgotten about. Like I would argue that Moon probably had some influence on this game, just because that is like the quote unquote anti-RPG, and I haven't played it yet, but from my understanding, it's very much a similar idea to Undertale, in that you go through and you make friends with the monsters and you try and save them after the horrible hero has gone through and killed them for RPGs and loot and shit like that. And that is literally you going back through and being like, no, you're a good soul, don't worry about it, let me fix things and make things better. Undertale. And then, you know, you have the Earthbound references, of course, and you have a lot of RPG elements that you see show up through it, and all these things coalesce to form Undertale. And then a lot of things have since then borrowed from Undertale and experimented around it and done a bunch of different things. So I would argue that yes, Undertale is a very important cultural touchstone that borrows from a lot of things, but it is not a ripoff, and it is not just a send-up of Undertale. It is, in fact, its own brand new thing, because all art borrows from other art, and the important thing is that you're left with something new and special, and Undertale is something desperately new and special, and comparing it directly to and only to Earthbound is a disservice to both games. They are very different games, accomplishing very different things, even if they share some aesthetic and surface level comparisons.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that like part of, you know, to tie it in a little bit back to kind of what we were saying in like a good way, is I think part of remix culture is like understanding that there's no such thing as a truly original idea, right? And I think that as someone who thinks a lot about this, like Toby Fox, like had to be aware of this and has worn his influences on his sleeve. Like he's outright said that one thing that inspired the combat was Shin Megami Tensei with like the demon negotiation. Now, granted, the demon negotiation was the absolute worst fucking part of Persona 5. I don't know why he would bring that into his game. But, you know, at least you can see it's better than Persona 5 at least. So, you know, hey, remix culture doing its job.
I think the Shin Megami Tensei demon negotiation is better than Persona 5 though, too, isn't it? Like, I want to say I've heard that.
I hear people say that. I very much doubt it. I'm very skeptical of like hardcore Shin Megami Tensei for a lot of reasons. A lot of that stuff in Persona 5 read to me is like, we took this straight from the NES game. Like, this is some of the same dialogue and shit. It was such nonsense. So
yeah, the demon negotiation Persona 5 is like, the moon was hungry yesterday, and the correct answer is, but the cheese was yellow. Whereas in Undertale, it's like, yes, I see what you are saying and would like to have a dialogue about it and not just respond in kind with more nonsense.
Yeah, no. So, again, like I'm sure I'm gonna get people mad at me for dunking on main Shin Megami Tensei. I really do have to play one of the main games at this point. So this is my disclaimer. I don't know for sure that it's the same as Persona 5. I highly suspect that it is, though.
Sam has played one, I think, Nocturne on the DS. Or no,
Okay.
Nocturne didn't come to the DS, did it? Apocalypse?
Yeah. Apocalypse is the 3DS one.
Yeah, she played the 3DS one and didn't see... I didn't hear anything about absurd demon negotiations, so... It might be better than Persona 5, but she also might just have a higher tolerance for bullshit than we do. So
that's stronger evidence that I have. So take everything I say with a grain of salt. But yeah, like I do completely agree. I think that just to dismiss it as an Earthbound ripoff would be to do it a disservice. However, I do think that there are several times, not overwhelmingly, but a couple of specific times that the game pulls from the aesthetics in Earthbound in a kind of sloppy way that's a little bit jarring. And one of those unfortunately happens to be the final boss. The other major one that I can think of off the top of my head is Temmie Village, which is just like Reddit Mr. Saturn cringe.
yeah, I didn't even make that connection really. I did last time, but this time I didn't even think about it. Because Mr. Saturn is just kind of weird and quirky, but Temmie Village is... I wonder if Temmie Village is going to come back around to being weird and quirky once we can divorce ourselves from the culture that spawned it. Like, I wonder if that's the type of thing that, like, Mr. Saturn might have had at some point, a similar cringy aesthetic to it, but now it's just kind of quirky and weird and goofy to us in the future year of 2020.
Well, Earthbound, because I think the thing about Earthbound and like why I maybe take issue with some instances of like, taking stuff from Earthbound more wholesale is that Earthbound's a very particular flavor of, it's a Japanese game made by a Japanese guy pulling from American culture, and then it's a Japanese script translated back into English. I mean, at least for us, like, obviously the buck stops at like the original game. And so like, I think that like that dynamic is different than I think just Teddy having some like Freudian slips about other characters that I hate. But I think that like there's a little more going on there than Temmie saying like lay epic hacksaws or whatever the fuck she's going on about.
I will have to say I did still laugh at the 4 Temmies in the row, and then the last one just be like, hey, I'm Tom, how's it going? Just because that stupid fucking joke. I like using that joke as it is. I'm a fan of that joke, so it hit me where it needed to.
No, like even there, it's not like completely removed from good bits. Like in the Temmie Village, like one of the things that made me laugh is that like it's the only place you can sell your items, and Temmie like doesn't want to buy this garbage because she has to pay for college. Like that was a little cute. And there were some layers to that. Like, oh, in addition to like haha relatable like college payment shit. There's that element that like you are literally selling her trash, so she's throwing away her college money on like an old shoe.
Well, especially because you can just use the dog residue and just constantly refill your bag with it, and that's what I did. I did that so I could pay. I did that basically the way I rationalized it in my brain was I'm like, okay, this person clearly has a spending problem and cannot pay for college and doesn't understand saving. So I'm just going to take all their money and then give it to them in one lump sum so they go to college on that money that they don't realize they have. So that was how I rationalized it in my brain. I don't know whether that was the intent or not. I was a bank for them, essentially. I did kick back like $200 of my own money, so it wasn't a complete waste. We should talk about Flowey.
Tevi earned a little interest. Oh, but yeah, I mean, Tevi's small potatoes. Like, I can forgive that, especially because that's like a little Easter egg put in by like the artist that helped him out. Her little like character. So you know, whatever. Like, that's small potatoes. Like, I find it kind of cringe, not that big a deal. But Flowey, on the other hand.
Yes, Flowey is where we run into an issue. So let's talk a little bit about what the neutral run looks like. In that, the neutral run is what you're going to experience on your first playthrough, basically no matter what. Because I guarantee your first playthrough, you will either... You will not know to spare everything or find like the 3 interactions that you have to. It's surprisingly easy to miss one of them, or you won't know to kill everything and hit the other couple triggers that you need to hit for it. I don't know what they are, but Jackson does. So you're going to get a neutral run on your first playthrough. And the payoff to that is that, oh, wow, Flowey was actually evil, even though we already knew that. And Flowey comes and kills Asgore, and in doing so, takes over and becomes not Gygus from Earthbound. And I mean that in the most literal definition, in that it is Gygus in everything but name and design. Because
the design is much, much worse.
Yes. I can see why it would work if you're younger. I think that if you were young, 13 when it came out, it might be a good design. It might hit you. And that's not to talk down to 13-year-olds to be like, oh, this is stupid. I like stupid things when I was 13 as well. But looking back on it from the perspective of a grown-ass man who has lost all sense of wonder and enjoyment from their life, it is objectively bad design. And pays off in the exact same way that Earthbound does.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like that's sort of one of the weird things about Undertale that I think this is related that I haven't said yet, but like on the one hand, I kind of want to recommend that people just play the true pacifist ending because like as a JRPG story, it has great characters. It's a great JRPG. But also, if you don't do the genocide run, you're kind of ignoring everything that makes it unique. Because otherwise, yeah, this is well-trodden ground, like a grand adventure where, like, you make a bunch of cool friends, and then there's some horrible, like, abomination at the end, and you throw a spirit bomb at it because they're such good friends.
Well, that's pretty much how the neutral run goes. The true pacifist is slightly different.
I'd say even that falls into it, but that's presented a lot better. That's like I like the ending of the I like the final boss of the true pacifist run. Like I think that there's more story, there's more character. That the actual throwing of the spirit bomb is more meaningful. And like I think actually it's funny because like Photoshop Flowey is like the perfect example of how like inspiration and remix culture can go kind of wrong. Because if you look at the comparison, if we just take it as read that Photoshop Flowey is 100% just Gygus, I think that's fair to say. In all the meaningful ways, like it's a weird jarring tone shift. There's fourth wall breakage, you know, hopeless fight against an abomination. Like it's very similar. And then we compare the inception of Gygus himself. The thing is that we also know how the Gygus fight came about and like what exactly drove him to end the game in such a Lovecraftian way. It's that to Itoi, Gygus was like the representation of like everything that a child doesn't understand about the adult world. And he specifically based it on a minor trauma that he had as a kid. As like a really young child, he was at a movie theater by himself and he walked into the wrong screen, and there was like a really violent scene that like he didn't understand and he thought was actually like a rape scene, like something really fucking horrible, and it wasn't, but like that's how his like brain perceived it. Like he was like not sure what was happening, that sort of thing, and he tried to put that into Gygus. So in a way, you could say even Gygus himself is an example of like remix culture, but that's like a really personal, like, the experience of like growing up. That's some really like resonant shit. Photoshop Flowey, not so much. It's wacky Gygus.
From what we know, I mean, there might be something more to it, but it is such a clear cut and dry reference to Gygus. Even in how you fucking beat him is almost exactly the same, just without the tension of I might die because, oh my god, there's no way to die in Photoshop Flowey. So it is just the most boring fight. It just feels more like a reference than a new creation of one's own design that is indicative of a trauma or something along those lines.
Yeah, and also, like, I just really hate the way Photoshop Flowey looks. I hate his visual design. I hate how it's, like, just a bunch of noise. I get what he's going for, that it's, like, really shocking. But it especially frustrated me in the neutral run because Asgore is a really great final boss. Asgore is like wonderful. Like, he's a great character. He's got a lot of depth. Like, I love the music. I love that, like, he kills. I mean, Undertale's no stranger to fourth wall breaks, but I love that he kills the mercy stuff and, like, in his sprite, he doesn't even look up at you while you're fighting him, and he's got all this weight from all his previous sins. This shit is great. And then Flowey comes out and is like, wacky.
Yeah, it's a hard drop after that, but it does lead into the true pacifist run, which is actually genuinely really, really nice.
Yes.
You get to go back and hang out with all your friends again and find out new things and horrifying things about a war criminal that goes by the name Aphis, who you struggle to like, but very much intentionally so, I would say. She does a lot to kind of not necessarily redeem herself. I don't think that you could really come back from that, but it underscores why she is the way she is in a really interesting way, before culminating in something that's beautiful and brought a little tear to my eye because I was so happy to be with my friends, and I grew and I made friends. It was great.
That's just what's so great about the game is like these characters are like genuinely iconic at this point. Like
in Smash level iconic.
In Smash level fucking iconic, which is funny because like the one character who is in Smash is the one that you don't see the full depth of unless you do the thing you're not supposed to.
Yeah, the Genocide run is weird in that regard. Well, here's the other thing too, is that playing through the neutral and the true pacifist run, there is like light touches of the meta to it, but it doesn't ever really dive into it. Like there's Photoshop Flowey plays with the your save and load states, and so does Azrael a little bit. So there's a little bit of reference to it, but it doesn't actually like explore what those means, and feels much more just like, this is a cool thing that we can do to show you how the game is changing, rather than the game is changing because you are causing it. These are the things that happen in the Genocide run.
I'm remembering now, speaking of that, like I'm having a memory from way back when we did this the first time, that like one thing that was like cool that I maybe didn't give the game enough credit for, and because even again, like even with all my criticisms of the game, like a lot of this stuff is just so bold and out there that like it would be hard to like you have to be like a fucking genius, like a crazy auteur to come up with these things, let alone execute them perfectly.
All of them, which again, Toby Fox executes a large number of them very, very well.
Exactly. So like I remember that I finished the neutral run and was like, fucking Photoshop Flowey, god damn it, ruining my good time. But then I didn't touch it again until we did it for the show. And then I remember at the beginning, like I remembered that scene where like Sans is introduced and he like shows up in shadow, and like you turn around and he has the whoopee cushion in the hand and his full form appears. I remembered that, and then like on my second time playing it, like intending to do the full true pacifist run, that scene happened. And Frisk turned around and like caught him before he said anything, and I was like, "What the fuck?" Like,
wait, really? Holy shit!
Yeah, and like I thought I had like reset the game, like so that was like the first time, because I never did. Like a lot of people's first experience knowing that the game save scums you is because it sets you up to accidentally kill Toriel. You reset Flowey remembers, but I never did that. I'm the sort of player that plays and is like, the where the dice rolls, the consequences are the consequences. That I think that's actually one of the reasons I bristled pretty hard with the game the first time, and that I felt like I was approaching the game in good faith, and the game was ascribing certain things to me. But it's more complicated than that. Obviously, I'm over the tutorial juke, I guess you could call it. But so I never had that experience. I didn't realize that the game straight up remembered, and like it didn't even, like, I didn't even catch on at first that, like, the main character remembered that, like, the game remembered until later when, like, Floey said something. I'm like, oh fuck, it didn't really reset. So like, does that shit add up to, like, making the ending with Asriel like that much better? I mean, not really, but it was still cool.
Yeah, this game is absolutely wonderful for everything it does, and honestly for everything it fails to do. I think it's a really interesting game that executes on a lot of really interesting ideas, and maybe all the themes don't come out perfectly in the way that we hope they would, but you know what? I can't fault it for trying.
Maybe my man flew a little too close to the sun, but at least, my God, they went for it. And even if he flew a little too close to the sun, his wings didn't burn up. They maybe just got a little singed. It's overall a very beautiful pair of wings.
He also still flew, which is something that most of us will not do, so...
Sean, why do you have to remind us? Undertale's such a positive game overall. Why'd you have to remind us that none of us will ever reach those glorious heights?
Well, I hope this has redeemed our last discussion of Undertale. I know we were still harsh of it in places, but again, it comes from a place of love because this game is really genuinely fucking wonderful, and I cannot recommend playing it. Even if you have listened to us talk all the way through it, I think there's still enough surprises and pleasantries in it that you should go check out. We did not talk about the characters like it all because that would take another hour of podcast time, and I have things I need to do in my life. The characters are great. You should play the game even if you've listened to us spoil everything, because you haven't heard us talk about Papyrus and Undyne and Metaton and everyone else that you meet. There's so many great characters. Please go play the game.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, 5 years out, game still a marvel, still a wonderful cultural touchstone. And I really, like, I remember that was the main thing that even when I first played it, I'm like, I don't know if I loved everything about that, but I hope that more games, both indie and like AAA going forward, put as much thought and care into the characters as this game did. Like, I feel like that's something that a lot of games can learn from this game.
Experimentation is important, and it doesn't always work, but it's good to see anyway, and we really don't need that 19th Assassin's Creed now, do we, when you can do something like this? Though I've actually heard good things about the new Assassin's Creed, so maybe we do. I don't know.
I'm distrustful because I heard good things about Odyssey as well. And I really, really did not like Odyssey, so I've been burned, I think.
See, I want to talk to you about that now, but we have to end this podcast. We have to stop talking. I've been Sean McKinda. I hope this is a solid apology for the nightmare that was the first Undertale episode. I hope that you accept the fact that we've done this 3 times now, and I'm sorry. Follow me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda.
And I've been Jackson Keller. You can follow me on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller. I mean, seriously, I mean it. If you take issue with my stance on the genocide run, I know I didn't really elaborate or provide that much support for my stance. So I am interested in having that conversation. I like getting into intellectual scraps with people. I love me a good debate. So yeah, feel free to come at me. I invite you to at me. I just want to say before we go that the one thing I regret that I'm going to force in here is, like, I'm about to make a bit that, like, this is truly the true pacifist run for the Horsecast discussion of Undertale. Like, we did it a couple times. We finally got it right and everyone's happy. But the last lingering thread is that yesterday I had one really good bit that I was really proud of. I don't even remember how Sean set it up. I think he made some pun, and I said I was about to do my own genocide run of this podcast, and I didn't get to say it this time. So there it is. That's the last bit.
Yeah, I remember that. I don't remember the setup either, but yeah, there's a lot that we did not cover on this episode. So really, if you at Jackson, I don't want to talk about this game anymore. I mean, let me rephrase that. I would talk about this game if you come at me with like good faith, like, hey, it's a great game. Yeah, I'll absolutely chat with you about it. But if you're just gonna come and argue with me, I don't like arguing on social media. So, maybe don't. But if you want to talk about like Undyne, I'll talk about Undyne with you.
I'll shoulder this burden. I'll be I'm the heel for this episode. So
Jackson, you're the heel for every episode.
True.
Follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. We mostly tweet about updates, things that are coming out, things that are changing, all that good stuff. If you really want to support us, patreon.com/BADHcast. $1 a month gets you extra to Discord where you can come and talk to us in a way easier way. So if you want to actually have a conversation with one of us, that's the best place to do so. $5 a month gets you extra to our Discord as well as our backlog of bonus episodes where you can hear us talk about what makes a bad thing bad. In the most recent episode in which we were planning on talking about Thanksgiving, but instead realized that Thanksgiving was too boring to actually talk about and instead debated our past movies. Words are hard today. It's a good episode, better than the sentence that's trying to describe it. $10 a month gets the extra everything I've said before, as well as the ability to request bonus episodes. Get them to us, and it also gets a little something something.
Thank you so much, Julia, Travis, Pat, Mom, Aunt Summer. Thank you so much for your determination in supporting this podcast and also your money.
Heyo. Also, thanks to the higher use of our theme song. It is Suicide, Alternate Take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out however you can. Stream them, buy their music. They're on Bandcamp now. Please go support them. Artists need that support. Also, thanks to my 5 years later site.com. There's little button ups in the corner, but you should definitely go check out that website. There's a bunch of really talented people doing a lot of really talented writing. And next week, as I said, we're going to watch Rubber Men knock over cities with Godzilla.
Oh, no. They say he's got to go, Godzilla.
You know what? The best part of fucking War of the Monsters was still that Godzilla cover.
That's true. That's true.
I still listen to that. That is such a good cover of that song. I fucking love that cover. Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go